It's really easy to forget some of the cooler functions the DualShock 4 has, simply because most games don't really use them. The DualShock 4 has a very cool touchpad. Most games barely seem to use it beyond a glorified menu or a map button, if that. The DualShock 4 has a gyroscope and an accelerometer. Most games rarely use it on the PS4. The DualShock 4 has that LED lamp, which, okay, that one is actually super annoying and hard to forget about because you can't even turn the damn thing off. But those features are there. They are largely unused outside of some VR games that put them to great use, such as Astrobot Rescue Mission, but they do exist. The question is, should they be retained in the DualShock 5 or whatever the PlayStation 5 controller is inevitably called, given how low their usage is? The basic answer to this question is yes. In fact, there's absolutely no reason to have a position other than yes for this question. But let's look at the many reasons why Sony should retain the touchpad and the motion controls and even that annoying LED light for the DualShock 5. Backward compatibility. Unless the PS5 is allowed to connect to PS4 controllers, which it might not be, the PS4 can't connect to DualShock 3 even though it can connect to the PS Move. There's no technical limitation for this either, it's just an arbitrary restriction. Sony needs to include every possible input on the DualShock 4 in the DualShock 5 for the purpose of backward compatibility, which at this point we can expect will be included on the PS5. Even games that only cursorily utilize these features will run into compatibility issues on the PS5 unless they have access to the inputs to begin with. VR compatibility. Maybe Sony ensures that any games made for the PSVR 2 or whatever the PSVR accessory for the PS5 ends up being called aren't designed around the DualShock 4, but in the here and now, we have multiple VR games that are designed around the DualShock 4 and in fact can only be played with it. Games such as Resident Evil 7 can only be played with a DualShock 4, while a game like Astrobot is explicitly designed around the controller's capabilities, specifically touchpad and LED lights. Unless Sony wants to break compatibility with these games on the PS5, DualShock 5 would have to retain these inputs. They're just options, and they don't hurt. This is the big thing here. The gyroscope and the touchpad are just options. They don't hurt anyone. At worst, if they're not used, then they're just there, completely unobtrusive. The touchpad can end up acting as additional buttons for developers to map to, and the gyro can be completely disabled. There's literally no reason to remove either feature. And no, they don't hurt battery life either. Okay, well, maybe the LED light does, and that's more because you just cannot turn it off. If you had the option to disable it completely, then even that wouldn't be an issue. There are literally no grounds to argue against the inclusion of these features. Sony needs to do a far better job of supporting both features in their games. But this brings us to our next point. Sony needs to do a better job of actually supporting these features, and I don't mean just by making them cool gimmicky ways to input text on the system UI. I mean that they literally need to support these features better in their own games. Third parties follow a platform holder's lead, since what a platform holder does is what establishes a community on a platform. If Sony doesn't implement gyro controls or touchpad support in their own games, why would third parties? It would cost them nothing, since the work to develop this feature is already done. It would cost nothing to the players, since only those who want to use it would enable the feature. But because there's no expectation of the feature on the PS4, third-party developers won't deliver on it. In such a scenario, of course, features like the gyroscope and the touchpad will go underutilized. Sony themselves don't seem to care about either of them, so why should third parties? DualShock 5 should have everything on the DualShock 4 and more. We don't know yet what form the DualShock 5 will take, but I hope it will be very similar to the DualShock 4. The DualShock 4 is a great controller. The shape and ergonomics are great, and it is very feature-rich. The low battery life is an issue, but one that will hopefully be countered by allowing us to turn the light off of the next controller. But that apart, I hope the DualShock 5 retains everything the DualShock 4 has. The same buttons and triggers and bumpers and sticks as always, but also the share button, the touchpad, the 6-axis motion capability, and then add on top of that something new such as paddles for additional control. Make it the perfect, ultimate controller. The PS5 will probably be home to some of the most sophisticated games ever made. No reason the controller can't be the most sophisticated controller ever as well. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from Gaming Bolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.